Okay, I'm ready to welcome everybody to the Tuesday, January 14th Policy Committee meeting. And I want to extend a special welcome, or a first welcome. Every welcome is special, but the first welcome to Avery Ciato, who is this officially your first Policy Committee meeting? Okay, so welcome as our student representative, Avery. I'm so glad you can join us for the year. And also I have three new committee members here, so I want to welcome them all to policy. Susan is a returning veteran, but Liz and Jeff are new to the policy committee in general, so hang on and get ready for the ride. Welcome, glad you're here. I want to welcome back Dr. Stevenson as our administrative liaison. It is the new year, so I don't know, I'm sort of thinking in terms of beginnings. And Mr. Diazio is our solicitor, and of course, Mr. Batchelor is our superintendent. So welcome, everyone. And I'd like to turn the meeting over to our administrative liaison, Dr. Stevenson, to provide us any administrative remarks he has.
Thank you. First of all, thank you and welcome back Chairman Goldman, and would like to welcome the other members of the committee who will be with us this year. It is a great opportunity once again to work with this important policy committee, and particularly working with our solicitor, who has been a valuable asset to us as we move forward with our policies. What I want to do is, a handout that you received is just to talk about a couple of things. On one side, it was just to give an update on what our policy committee goals were last year and give a status on that, and to let you know that next month what I will be doing is with the consultation of Mr. Batchelor and our chairs to talk about, come up with our committee goals for next year. So first of all, our goal was, one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to create a dissemination process that we would look at over the year about priorities, working with our solicitor and the guidance of our chairperson. We were able to put together these regulation dissemination process about how we can have them consistently implemented over time. Goal number two was, again, another goal that we did was to look at, evaluate, and refine the necessary policies, and also identify those that became, for a variety of reasons, that we need to move up. For instance, we have the opportunity with Ed to have monthly meetings and conversations about those policies that may impact us. Either they're expired because of state or federal law, or there were some changes from PDE or some other particular instance. The second thing that we made as a priority is impact and requests from our administrators. There is a constant dialogue with our building level and our central administrators to talk about various policies that impact the school district, but are also the ones that would improve or enhance how we do our daily activities. And the last is that, what we are doing is we are continue to evaluate various policies and ARs, and looking at that process. What I did not do, but I will do, is there's a flow chart about what that process, when it goes from, for next month, when I talk about goals, I'll include that with a flow chart that was created, where we talk about what happens when it goes from this level to the board, then it's disseminated, how it's disseminated to administrators, how it's disseminated and shared with the community. I will give a acknowledgement to our communications, Mr. Petiti, he has, one of the things that he has worked hard on when a policy is finalized and sent out, he has made it a priority to share that with the explanation about those things. So I think it's important that not only we as a policy committee pass important policies or make those changes, but it's also important that we share with the community they have an understanding what those changes are. On the other side of that information of this sheet, you will find, you will see that there was a lot of work that was done. This is just to give you an idea what policies were passed in 2019. Yep, so just that's my summary for that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and that's really for the benefit of everybody here, most of whom you were not joining us for 2019 work, and this is meant to be a snapshot of what we did. So if you have any further questions about that, or the goals that for 2019 that we worked on, please don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Stevenson. So with, if there are no questions about the administrative remarks, I'd like to open up for public comment in case there's anybody who would like to make public comment. Nope, I'm getting, okay, so we will move then into the approval of minutes. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes, and any issues with the minutes as far as you can tell? Nope, okay. All right, well then let's move into our first agenda item of the evening, and that is policy 201, admission of students. And this policy is before us for a second read, and I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Stevenson to walk us through anything he wants to add about the policy.
Just briefly, that this policy 201, admission of students, was internal review that was passed in first read in the January regular business, and we ask that the board, the committee approves it to move on to the regular business, January business meeting for a second reading.
Okay, great, thank you. So let me turn it over to our student representative to see, don't feel any pressure, but if by any chance something jumped out at you about this policy and you had any questions, this is your opportunity to ask them.
No, I looked over
The microphone, Avery, there you go.
I looked over it and I think it all looks good and ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me then turn to Liz. Do you have any questions about the policy?
Yeah, my only concern was regarding the upcoming school year, 2020-21. You know, this is, I think when your child enters school for the first time, it's something you plan well in advance. And I know last time when we were discussing this last meeting, we talked about some consideration of some accommodation for parents who might have already planned ahead. If they happen to have a child that falls in that September timeframe. So that's my only concern on whether we consider putting some language in.
Okay, so before the administration answers that, let me just check and see if there's anyone else who echoes that concern or has additional ones, so we can get it answered in one fell swoop.
No, I would appreciate that being brought up and look forward to sort of how that might be ameliorated with some things, because I don't know the timeline for when traditionally parents might be looking for their first child or first time coming into the district, what this sort of January, February timeframe would look like.
Okay, terrific. And Susan?
That's my only concern is, you know, how we're handling next September. And, you know, I had heard from another board member who had that concern as well.
Okay, great. So I'd like to turn it over to our administration or solicitor, whatever you guys want to do with it, to help address the concern about the change, just so in case anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, the change in the kindergarten enrollment deadline for this upcoming school year is currently slated to go into effect upon the passage of this policy at the end of the month, but there seems to be some concern about maybe that's not a long enough advanced window for folks who are counting on a certain date for this upcoming school year.
Sure. So certainly, if the committee wanted to do so, you can build language into this policy that either permanently or for a specific period of time authorizes administration to make exceptions to the deadlines under any circumstances that the committee deems appropriate. So that language can be put into the policy. That would be a substantive change to the policy, so that would mean that the policy would move for a repeat first reading this month and then would be adopted in February. So I'm not sure, you know, when exactly kindergarten registration opens or when you want to open it, but that might be one thing to keep in mind when deciding whether or not to make a change. The other thing that can be done is the policy can be left as it is now, can be adopted at the January meeting of the board. And if the committee would like, you can immediately refer the policy back for further review for possible further revisions. So you could adopt the policy as it's written now, open kindergarten registration, and to the extent that there are families out there who feel that the new policy language is not what they had planned for, and they raise that concern with school officials, if the committee directs that the policy be brought back for further review, at least those families could be told that the board is aware of that issue and is going to address it in some way.
Could we possible also, Ed, maybe if we made a change, and if we made a change or just added a sentence about requests for any exceptions to this policy may be made to the superintendent or superintendent's designee, and we wanted to make that change, could we waive one of the readings, at the next board meeting? Because you're saying that change kicks it back for another reading. We could also at the meeting vote to waive that additional reading as a board.
I think I have two different comments there. If you're simply clarifying that exceptions can be made by the superintendent, I think you could argue, I think you could articulate that a position that that's not a substantive change.
Mm-hmm.
If you're building in criteria upon which the superintendent can base decisions, and the board wants to put specific criteria about when and under what circumstances an appeal can be granted, then I believe that would be a substantive change. Now, under the current policy, and Susan and I talked about this briefly before the meeting, under the current policy, technically you can only waive a second reading in cases of an emergency. Now, the board can choose how it wants to address that topic. But I'm just telling you what your current policy says.
We have another policy that defines the emergencies. I'm being tongue-in-cheek. I mean, I would argue, and I mean, it's really up for discussion with the committee, but I would be very comfortable with adding a sentence in there, and I don't know if we put it under delegation of responsibility or under guidelines. I would think under delegation of responsibility. It's common for many of our policies to have requests for exceptions or appeals or to be handled by the superintendent or superintendent's designee, that we add a sentence that requests for any exceptions to this policy may be made in writing to the superintendent or superintendent's designee. I don't think we'd have to lay out the criteria. Then it would be up to us as administration, when someone writes to us asking for an exception, to determine then whether or not we would grant such an exception. The reality is that this does happen anyways already. I mean, even though it doesn't say it in the policy, you can imagine we have parents who reach out to us about our current, cutoffs and ask for exceptions. And it's not something that we usually grant. However, I think being mindful of the fact that it is January and we're changing something for next year, and being mindful of families that have been in the community who have been planning for their child. I think as board members spoke, been planning for, their child was born on September 17th and they were ready for this coming year. I can relate if I was one of those parents, then all of a sudden to find out September 17th is no longer the deadline. We would take that under consideration and to look at that, especially this year. There would be one set of criteria we would develop administratively to deal with just this year because of the timeliness of it. And then we would look, as moving forward, I don't think that will factor in as much because the word will get out. The word will get out to all our preschools. The word will get out to the families in our community. And the other side of it is it also helps some of our parents who have those kids with the birthdays in that month of September. This actually might help them too. Some of them maybe have been on the fence on what to do, and this might give them guidance as well.
Okay, so, and I just wanted to provide maybe a little context, particularly for Jeff and Liz, who are new, and you're hearing us throw around the substantive change thing. We have a policy 3, that really delineates how we do policy work in the district. And in there, it's outlined what a substantive and non-substantive change to a policy is. And if we do want to make a change to a policy, once we're down the road of the policy process and something meets the criteria of being substantive, we have to start the process all over again. So I just didn't want you, I don't know if you felt a little left behind in that part of the conversation, but I wanted to just point that out. The second thing with the sensitivity to the timeline is when registration for kindergarten typically opens. So that's another reason why this is coming up, because it's probably around this time that we open for registration. So that said, there are some options that are on the table. I think Mr. Batchelor has expressed a preference or a suggestion for us, and I'd like to hear from you guys if you're comfortable with that suggestion. Liz, you want to?
I think I'm comfortable, but how do we communicate, I mean, can we still communicate that to the community, that there will be, you know, that we're open to exceptions for the current school year? I want to make sure that we seem responsive, or at least that we've thought about this, you know, to the community members who, you know, have probably already planned or think their kid's coming to school next year. And if they see the policy as it's written, even with that exception piece, I want to know that, you know, the door's open.
So I think the biggest reason why we need to put that language in there is to give us as the administration the leeway to actually act upon a request. Without that language in there, we don't have the ability to act upon a request for an exception. So I don't find that our parents involved in this and a lot of different, you know, concerns within the district are actually, unfortunately, you know, they're not reading our policy manual. I don't know that people are actually reading this. So the parents who will have a concern, they're going to make themselves known. They will reach out to us.
Yes.
They will let us know. So I'm not as worried about that. What I was worried about as I started to think about this is, without putting that language in there, we as administration have an inability to even listen to those requests. By putting the language in there, it gives us the opportunity now to act upon it. So I think people will let us know, without having read this or not, they're going to let us know that if they have a concern, you know, they were planning on this, ooh, we just heard about this change, well, let us know. And that word will get out through the preschools as well, that is, where there is a transition year. Doesn't mean we're going to grant every request. I mean, we're going to look at it and look at each one individually. We will develop our own criteria, and that's normal for us too, that we don't put that detail into a policy. It's really in the administrative regulations, or as administratively, we'll develop what is that criteria for making those decisions. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, but to clarify, like, how does it, I kind of forgot this, but when do we reach out to people about the registration date, to the community? Or is that just something that occurs, like, do we reach out through the nursery schools in the area? Is that something that just occurs online or on the website? Like, how, in fact, do we get the word out that it's, you know, it's now open? And then in that piece of communication, would we be open to saying, you know, there is a change and it's based on state law, and, you know, and then explaining that it's in alignment also with where every other, you know, the other districts are? I think we have good rationale. And then would we there say, you know, if you have a concern, your child is born in September, and you want to come to, I mean, I guess the question is, do we want to open that door up?
We certainly could. We could certainly list that in there and change, and that, you know, we could make mention of that reality that, you know, and with this change, if you know, there is a procedure for you to apply for exception for this year, we could make mention of that, and I'd be comfortable with that as well. I asked Mr. Dukavich, Sean, to come up just to talk a little bit about how we let people know about how kindergarten registration is open and when we plan to open it this year.
Great, thank you. Actually, funny, right before this meeting, I met with a team of teachers and the Radnor Memorial Library to talk about kindergarten readiness. So we're preparing for an evening event on the 26th of February, where we invite and we make it known to all the local preschools for parents who are expecting kindergarten, or even if they're not, they just want to be prepared, even if it's years ahead. They're all welcome to attend this evening event to share not only details about what our kindergarten program looks like at Radnor, but also how to prepare, what the program in a day in the life of is for kindergarten students, and how to go about registering for kindergarten. Part of our enrollment study this year, we're also looking at how our registration process works and how we're screening students and introducing them, placing them in the coming year. And there's a prevailing interest in changing the way we screen students in the past. Right now it happens the first week of school, as it exists currently and has existed for some time. Kindergarten students would come to school for half days while their siblings in other grades are coming for full days until they're kind of sorted into classes, and they don't find out their homeroom teacher currently until like the third day of school. What we're trying to do is have that process take place like it does with all other students in the K-5 program. So that would be done in the spring and early summer. So placement would happen, and they would start the school year, the same time as everybody else would. So that process would also be married with registration. So what we're looking at doing is pushing back at the opening of registration till a little later than in the past, so we can marry the screening process with the registration process. So it's a one-time visit for the parent, and then a secondary visit where they can have a play and a social event. And that can all be observed by the teacher, so placement can be really comprehensive.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt that, but did I just understand you say you might be pushing? Oh, sorry. Did I understand you to say you might be pushing back registration?
So registration naturally is opening soon, but what we're trying to do is organize it such that parents can sign up for a specific time rather than just come at any time, and that way they can have their child have the screening process done while they register at the same time at the school.
Still start at the end of January, because I thought that we had an interest as a district in kind of knowing, approximately how many students are coming for, next year, and for planning purposes,
Sure.
Earlier was better. But you're saying maybe make it more like an appointment and do both the registration and screening at the same time?
Yes, and at the school setting, so it's not just at the school and then sometimes here, and I think parents like the idea of going to the actual setting, the school, to register.
So the whole central registration thing's not gonna stay?
Oh, so this is how it was done even last year. There was registration at the school, and then when the summer break took place, the rest of the central registration took place here. But last year, this worked in the same way. We're just looking at trying to marry the screening process, so it took it out of the beginning of the school year, which was a little bit of, I think teachers would tell you, it's a little bit of an anxiety inducing process. And then for parents and kids, they know going into this, the school year, who their teacher will be in advance, just like every other, grade would.
So, I mean, that's all really helpful information. I don't know if it answers your question, Liz, yet about the communication about the deadline through the process.
Sure.
So just to make sure we stay on topic, because we want to resolve this and move on to the
Well,
next agenda item.
we could-
What do you think?
Sure, we can add in our information that we post and we share out, and in those informational meetings that make everyone aware of this change in cutoff with the birthday, and with that change in cutoff, also advertise to them, the process for parents who might seek exceptions. I do want to be careful.
Yeah.
Be very careful, because I'm going to want to couch that in just that month, because we have every year parents who want exceptions to this policy, and that's not what we're looking to do. We're not looking to make exceptions. So I don't know exactly how the wording will be, but we'll try to put something in there. But I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. I really think the parents who have a concern about the change are going to reach out to us. I'm pretty confident they will do that.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about I don't look at, I was a promoter of, we need to let the nursery schools know that the date has changed, so that the vast majority, hopefully, of parents whose kids fall in this time frame will make the choice to keep their child in the nursery school or pre-K program. Because let's remember, part of the reason that we are making this change, it was really instigated by the feeling at the teaching level, at the curricular level, that given our curriculum, it would be better if the children were September 1st, not September 30th. So to kind of encourage appeals, to some extent, defeats the purpose of the intention. So that would be my only concern about overly advertising. Here, we're making this change, but you can appeal it over here. That'd be my only concern.
And the reality is, again, we're talking 5 on average,
Yeah,
5 to 10 students, or 5 to 10 families. And I just really think that parent who's been in the community who's September 17th birthday, and this is their second, third, or fourth child, so they really knew what the cutoffs were. they're going to reach out to us. And the most important part here is that we put something in here that we then have an ability to respond to that. Without that language in here, we wouldn't have administratively the ability to even then entertain whether or not we'd want to make an exception.
Okay. So Liz, do you feel like you've been heard? Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I just think it's in the how do you make the sausage now, in terms of just acknowledging in the policy your ability, but also being time sensitive, because we wouldn't want this to be like, okay, here we are again in 2021, and no, we want that policy to be very, the exceptions to be rare.
Okay. So I think, Susan,
Whether, at the end of the day, I don't want to do something that's going to trigger this to be a second read in February. So, to me, the most important thing at this stage is whichever direction allows the board to pass this in January as a second read. So whether that is, the solicitor's opinion that the suggested language, and that Ken mentioned, which I think is sufficiently vague, the more specific you get on policy changes at this stage about something, the more it probably does engender a second, a repeat first read. So if our solicitor feels like the wording of, there will be an appeal process, a request for exceptions, should be, maybe just requests for exceptions should be referred to the superintendent or his designee. That's a pretty generic statement.
It's a clarifying statement.
Clarifying statement. So if the solicitor's comfortable with something as like that wouldn't kick a second read, I'm comfortable with it. Otherwise, I would say we should pass it the way it is and put it into an immediate review in February. But I'm sounding like there's a path forward here. And then we have the option to remove that or not remove that. That's sufficiently vague, but gives the administration some provision. The only other thing I would say is I don't think this needs an AR. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward policy. We don't have to go looking for extra work. You guys have been admitting kids to kindergarten for a very long time here without an AR. So, and if you're telling us that casually you get requests for exceptions anyway, this just gives you the policy to say we can consider them, so.
The one clarifying question I would ask is, what does the committee want the scope of the exceptions to be? What can folks request an exception to? Is it simply the kindergarten deadline, or is it any aspect of the policy?
And that's where the specificity, because really all we were talking about was the kids who are between September 1st and September 30th next year only.
For kindergarten.
For kindergarten. Next year only. Yeah, so, you'll have to guide us on what level of specificity you can have in here that's not going to kick it to a second read. And in keeping with what the superintendent, and Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Dukevich are looking to, achieve with this.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, guide us on this, but I would say, a statement on delegation of responsibility of requests for any exceptions to this policy may be made to the superintendent or designee is sufficient. The reality is there's anything that exists in any of our policies or any pieces, from time to time, someone requests an exception or that feels it doesn't apply to them, or, that's something that people often bring up. So I don't know that, I don't think our hands would be tied in enforcing this policy, and I can say our intention will be to enforce this policy, and our intention we would not be looking to make exceptions to the first grade cutoff, for example, and that our intentions in that language is very much focused on the change in next year and those 5 to 10 potential families who are within that month of September.
Does that conflict in any way with the exception that's stated for first grade? Because there is exception language that's in the first grade guideline. So, just want to make sure that there isn't anything that could trip us up accidentally in that.
I don't think so. But Ed, do you think any concern there?
Well, there is exception language built into the policy under the section titled first grade, so I actually am thinking that perhaps this additional language that we're gonna put in about requests for exception should just be listed under the kindergarten section of the policy
And
instead
maybe
of
just
Okay.
under the
reference
delegation.
kindergarten? Should
That
it
makes
maybe
sense.
just reference kindergarten, just to be clear? Because there are a couple other things the policy requires in terms of proof of residency, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
So do you maybe wanna just make sure that it has age, age of entrance for kindergarten is the exception that could potentially be addressed by the superintendent?
Yep. Requests for exceptions to,
The age of admission or whatever, enrollment date, whatever you call it.
This-
for exceptions to
age of admission.
the, to the age, this age, the age.
The age?
So we'll put that language under kindergarten then, and does that make sense in moving forward?
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to wordsmith it right now. We can
No, I
give
mean, I
that
think it belongs there.
there. So I think we've got the essence of what the language would look like and the location of where to place it, and I'm hearing the feeling that it's a non-substantive change.
Yep. Okay, so let's, everybody head nod good with where we're headed with this, so we will see that for a second read at the business meeting at the end of the month. Thank you guys for that discussion. Okay, moving on, 4.2, the policy 249, anti-bullying is in front of us for a first read.
Yes, this is, anti-bullying has actually been brought back up. It was tabled last month after discussion about some language. I will now let our solicitor talk about proposed language based on that last month's conversation.
So since the last time this policy was discussed, we clarified in the policy the definition of school setting. And specifically, we added language. There was a question regarding when the district has jurisdiction over conduct that occurs off school property. So we added language in the policy that indicated that the circumstances as to when the district has that jurisdiction to regulate off-campus conduct would be outlined in the administrative regulation. And then if you go to the administrative regulation, we did add some language. It's the section of the AR titled Regulation of Off-Campus Behavior and Circumstances. That language was added to clarify the criteria that have to be met in order for the district to be able to discipline for conduct that takes place off of school property.
And also, I would say that under number 5 in that section was an insertion, that sentence. Do you want to speak to that one, Ed?
Which one? Under,
Right there, number 5. Parents, guardians, or students with questions regarding, that was an important insertion. You want to speak to that?
correct, so we added language. There was a question about if parents, guardians don't know, if they have questions about whether or not conduct is subject to regulation by the district, they can contact their building principal. So for example, if a student is being bullied at home through social media, we added this clarifying statement to say if parents don't really know how to respond to that and they're not sure whether it's something that the district can do anything about, you're encouraged to talk to your principal about it. And a lot of times, whether or not the district and what exactly the district can do is very much dependent on the very specific conduct at issue. So we encourage parents to speak with the building principal about what's going on, and based on what's taking place, we can decide whether it's something that the school district can discipline for, whether it's something outside of discipline, whether there are other supports that the district can put in place to support a student that feels that they're being bullied, or possibly external resources that might be available to help the family.
Okay, great, thank you. I hope that's clarifying for everybody. Avery, do you have any questions based on that?
No questions, but when I was here with Rachel, we kind of mentioned like social media and like its growing presence in like social media, like bullying, all that, and I appreciate that we like clarified school setting to like kind of extend beyond like the boundaries of the building itself.
Yeah. And that said, I know that Mr. Diazio can comment on the fact that unfortunately, I don't think the law has quite kept up with the rate of transgression in the social media world. So there's only so much I think that can be done. But yes, the clarification was made based on feedback you guys provided the other month as well. Liz, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just had one question under school setting, number 5. It says activities sponsored, supervised, and sanctioned by the district. So clarifying that it includes, school sporting events. And then I guess my question is, would that also include township rec sports that happen, in our buildings?
Certainly if there is conduct that's taking place, if individuals are using our facility and there is alleged wrongdoing that's taking place by the participants, one of the requirements when you use school district facilities, one of the things you have to agree to is to agree to be bound by all applicable policies and rules of the district. So if there's an allegation that individuals who are using district facilities, that they or their participants are not complying with a school district policy, it would be an interesting question whether we can discipline, because it may be a non-student of ours, in which case there's not a whole lot we can do. But what can be done is the district always reserves the right to immediately suspend a user's use of property for really any reason if we don't feel that they're complying with our rules.
And can I just add that if there are students, so for instance, if, a lot of the students are colleagues in our schools, so if there are 2 kids in the same school and it has implications that can move into school and it's brought to our attention, then we deal with it to address it so it won't cause additional issues. But as the solicitor said, non-students, that becomes another conversation.
So just a quick follow-up to that, actually, only because I don't want to forget it, is that, Ed, the definition school setting means, 1, in school. So in a circumstance, and I thought that was an interesting one, in a circumstance where, let's say, a township activity is taking place in school, if you say
Like rec
school
basketball.
setting means in the school, it actually, it really changes the meaning of what it means to be in school, because the way you read school setting means in school. Well, that means school day, in the building itself, but it can be really implied, or you can really infer from that it means during the school day. Whereas if you just say school setting means in the school, kind of regardless of when it's happening in the building.
So that definition of school setting,
Is that code?
the piece that says in school, on school grounds, in school vehicles, that is code language. And
Okay.
if you look at my interpretation of the intent of the language is that in school is, it's not meant to be the location of the physical building of the school. It's
It means the
meant to
school
be
day.
during the school day.
Okay.
That's why there's the other items listed.
Right, okay, so then, back to what Liz was saying, and I just didn't want to lose this train of thought then. Really, we could theoretically have a circumstance where they just happen to be in the building, but that would come under those other policies that have to do with the use agreements? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Okay. Jeff?
So in school would be like even a field trip? 'Cause-
Correct.
Yeah. okay.
That, correct.
Yeah, I thought so. No, I just.
Really, and that
yeah.
really would fall under,
5.
number 5,
Yeah.
activities.
I think you answered it. It's just I echo Avery's comments on what can we do. It sounds like we're doing everything we can, which is you ask questions because cyberbullying is such an incredibly challenging problem. And I just appreciate that all we can do to let parents know that there will always be an open door to file that, because whether they go to law enforcement and or the school principal, just, it's going to change tomorrow. We're going to learn something new. So thank you.
Okay, so can we send this along for a first read? Is everybody?
I didn't make my
I'm
comments.
sorry, I thought
That's
that
all
was your comment.
Oh, no, I was following up to
Okay.
Liz's question. So, the only comment I have about the policy is the title. And I've brought this up before, and I know it changed a couple years ago, and I recall at the time the intention of changing the title from bullying to anti-bullying was to try to send the message that we are against bullying. But in fact, I did a fair amount of research this weekend, and the school code says that school districts need to be updating the bullying policy. And I did a survey of about, 8, 9, 10 different school districts. No one calls it anti-bullying. And in fact, this isn't a policy about anti-bullying, because anti-bullying would be a bullying prevention program. This is a policy about bullying, and what it says about bullying is that we prohibit it. It's not allowed. Just like we have a policy about smoking, and it's not called the anti-smoking, it's a policy about smoking, and it's not allowed. So I would suggest that we go back to titling this for what it is. It's a bullying policy. And there's a lot of school districts, basically every school district I looked at, that's how it's titled. And so that is my only comment about the policy. And, other than the other work that was done to improve it and to clarify it, I think was really important work.
Okay, so let me just get is there anybody who has any deep thoughts about that, or strong thoughts, I should say, one way or the other? Liz, Avery, or would you be just as happy to have it be called bullying as anti-bullying? Okay.
I like it.
Okay. The consensus of this committee is that change the title of the policy, please, from anti-bullying to bullying. And thank you, Susan, for the research you did on that. It's always helpful when someone is
Well,
willing to
thank
do the research. And we will be able to move this forward for first read at the end of the month then. All righty. Moving along, let's go to our next agenda item, which is policy 919, civility. And I will toss it to the team on the left to give us a little background on this item.
As it summary says that, this comes from the policy for 249 anti-bullying, soon formerly known as anti-bullying. The question was asked about bullying type behavior committed by non-students handled. So therefore, this policy was brought forth to the committee tonight for consideration for first reading in the January business meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and this is a policy, this is not a totally rogue policy. This is a policy that several other districts have on their books. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
We just haven't had it. So, Avery, do you have any thoughts on policy 919?
No, I like it.
You like it? Okay, a student endorsement is always a good thing to have. Thank you, Avery. Liz?
The only comment I have is whether we'd include, like we did in the others, coaches singling out. It seems that we talk about guardian staff, contractors,
Is your mic
volunteers.
on, Liz?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? We just don't, there's no mention of coaches, and
And where, are you looking at in the purpose?
I'm looking at the volative.
You might, I think Liz
Wait.
is looking at the administrative regulation.
sorry.
Look up there, Liz, and see if that's,
I am. Yes, okay, yes, purpose, yes, it's on both, sorry.
okay.
So we can, if the committee would like, we can add coaches and activity sponsors to that list. I believe we've done that before in other policies.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I would too. Jeff, do you have any, I'm sorry, Liz, did you have any others? Okay, Jeff?
Nope, I'm happy
Okay,
with the way it is.
Susan?
No, I think Liz makes a good point.
Okay. I would just like to address in the AR, under strategies for addressing violative behavior and conduct. If a participant, the very first sentence, if a participant in any type of district meeting, and we talked about this in our planning about the meetings, I think there might have just inadvertently been a misconstruing of board or committee meeting. I think we only need to say board meeting. By committee meeting, I think in this conversation we were having, was alluding to other types of meetings besides board meetings. So by committee meeting, I didn't mean either a business meeting or a committee meeting. I meant board meeting or other type of committee that's been convened. So would you be comfortable to expand the type of meetings that those could be? Would be IEP meetings, parent-teacher conference, board meeting, or a sporting event, PTO, blah, 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 just to give additional examples. That capital C committee really doesn't capture the essence of the breadth of type of scenarios I was hoping we were going to be illuminating for everybody, if that makes sense.
All right, so I've taken committee meeting out, so it says IEP meeting, parent-teacher conference, board meeting, or,
PTO meeting,
How much you say other district-sponsored
something like that.
meetings or activities?
Yes, love it. Very good at the wordsmithing tonight, Mr. Batchelor, thank you, on the fly. I mean, you're always good at it, but it's really been especially notable on the fly tonight. So thank you, yes, that sounds great. What do you guys think? Good?
Well, it changes the meaning too, so it's, I mean, the committee capitalized would be,
Yeah,
you're
that
right,
was
spot
not-
on.
Okay. Excuse me, and then my only follow-up question has to do with actually 249 in that where it says adult to adult. Bullying behavior is addressed through 248, 348, blah, 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 and 806. By any chance, do 919 or 906 need to be referenced in there? Wait, what's that? So if you go back to, sorry for the lack of sequence here, but it just occurred to me, in policy 249, in the purpose, the second sentence says, this policy is limited to bullying of students by other students. Allegations of bullying by employees or other adults are covered by the policies 348, 448, 548, and 806. And I'm just wondering if, because we talk about civility, and we have recourse for lack of civility in agenda item, the next agenda item we're about to discuss, should that be expanded to include now 919 potentially and 906?
Thank you, I'm sorry, now I'm following what you're saying, thank you.
Okay.
But I have a comment about it, but I follow it.
Okay, great. Solicitor, what would you say about that?
I think that either mentioning or cross-referencing 919
thank you.
makes sense. And usually, in most policies, we don't, in the body of a policy, call out
Right,
specific
thank you.
numbers.
Right.
So that's kind of my suggestion, is that this should say, are covered by other policies, and then put one of those little cross-reference things, because technically we can't put in
Right.
civility yet, it's not a policy yet.
Right.
But if you cross-reference it just there, then 248, 348, 448, 548, 806, 906, I mean, 919, whatever the policies are, can be updated without this having to be a change to the policy.
So what we could say there is, this policy is limited to bullying of students by other students. Allegations of bullying by employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies.
Correct.
And then there would be a string of citations there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
That would be
Sorry to
better.
sort of step back
No,
into that
thanks.
world, but it just, sometimes the neurons fire at different times and.
Can I
Ms.
just make one
Farman,
comment,
yes.
since we're stepping back into that world? I didn't note, on that AR, when we talk about reporting procedures,
Are you, when you said that AR, are you
I'm
talking
sorry.
about 249's AR?
249, yes, thank you. At the end, where we talk about the reporting procedure, it says district employees, and I know that includes teachers, but could we just add teachers as well? Because we've called out coaches and other specific, I don't know, it just seems more, it's right down here, that,
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that's
so,
what I'm saying.
how about, just in the interest of time, because we want to wrap this up, could you circle that? ARs don't need to go through the policy approval
Yep.
process. And
Sure.
maybe that's something that, since this is just a first read, when we come back for the second read, Liz,
Perfect.
highlight that, and we'll
Great.
talk about it in the next month. Is that all right?
yes.
Okay, super. Does anybody have anything else about 919, or are we ready to move that along for a first read? Yep, good. Okay, so the very last policy on our agenda for tonight is 906, which is called, well, soon to be called, formal complaints. So I would like to turn it over to our team to introduce that.
Yes, the purpose of this is to propose the policy of public complaints change to formal complaints. and ask that this be brought to the full board in January business meeting for first reading.
Yeah, I think this came on the radar primarily because policy 917 invokes 906 as a remedy, and our solicitor thought, looking at it, that it needed some updating. Is that correct?
Yeah, policy 906 was not, the scope of the policy was not very well, the scope and the language in the policy was not very well organized previously. So we broadened the scope of the policy, and essentially what this policy does is anytime there's someone that feels aggrieved and there's not a separate delineated policy under which you can file a complaint, this policy is now sort of a catch-all policy, and the administrative regulation will outline specific steps that individuals can take to file a complaint, the timeline for investigation, and what the expected outcome can be. And we'll share that administrative regulation before next month.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So, Avery?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. In the purpose, we say like procedure for parents, guardians, students, and community members. And I was curious to know why we kind of like restricted it so much, while in the last policy we were saying contractors and coaches and all these other people in the community, why we were so narrow in scope on this one.
That's a good question.
Oh, interesting.
So the group of employees was deliberately left out because there are other mechanisms for employees to file complaints regarding any number of topics. The scope can definitely include coaches and contractors and those things. So we can expand that list if that's something that the committee would like to do. Certainly a good point.
Okay, I'm having trouble, was that in the original 906 that was referenced, or was that somewhere else where?
But Ed, hang on a second, wouldn't contractors also come under a different policy as employees? Contracted employees, but employees.
Contracted employees, they wouldn't have, a contracted employee wouldn't have like detailed like grievance or complaint procedures that are in like a collective bargaining agreement.
But so coaches could be full-time employees who happen to be coaches.
Sure.
So they wouldn't use this policy.
For the majority of the complaints, probably not. Now, there could be some complaints, depending on the subject matter of the complaint, that it's not appropriate to file it pursuant to other procedures.
Okay.
We did add language to say in here that when a complaint is received, if for some reason it should be handled under a separate complaint procedure that's either required by law or a contract, then administration has the right to sort of redirect the complaint through a different procedure.
Perfect.
Okay, so getting back to Avery's question about expanding the scope, is it appropriate to expand that in the purpose for 906? In terms of who the procedure applies to?
I don't have any concern about expanding it. Because at the end of the day, if there is a complaint that is filed under this policy and it's not ultimately supposed to be here, it'll get redirected.
Okay, so employees was taken out. I mean, employees are not in here. How are we proceeding on that then? What would we be expanding to is my question. In the purpose.
Avery, what else did you ask about?
In like the previous one, like volunteers, and
Are
then
you
we
talking
used,
about when you say previous
yeah,
to
919 is civility.
Okay.
Like we said volunteers, and then members of the public, while here we like restricted it to like community members, if that's the same term, and then like volunteers you kind of addressed more as like employees, which would fall under like a different policy.
I think it's definitely appropriate to put volunteers in.
Okay.
And in terms of community members or members of the public, I think those words are interchangeable, but if there's a preference, we can certainly modify that.
I personally would leave it to, if the administration or the solicitor has a preference for one thing or another, if it's a matter of just expanding the scope, what you call it is, can we leave it up to you guys to decide that? Does anybody here on the committee have a preference for that?
No, I just asked, do we do we generally interchange, like, members of the public, community members, more for my edification?
I don't think, my guess, without looking, is that the policies probably say different things, but it's
Same, yeah.
interpreted the same.
I trust
Okay.
your judgment.
Okay. Did I ask, I'm trying to remember, did I ask you, Liz, if you had any questions? No.
No comment.
Okay. Jeff, Susan?
There's a minor typo, but I can just tell you that it jumped out at me, but I can show you after the meeting. It's not a big deal.
All right, super. And I'm fine with this now that we've had
Yeah,
those
it's good.
conversation. Let's move it forward for first read. And with that, let's go to our final round of public comment. Do we have any tonight? I skipped over new business. Does anybody have new business? No? Okay. Welcome, Dr. Winters.
Good evening. I wanted to commend Mr. Stevenson for his updating us on how these policies are communicated and mentioning Mr. Petiti in terms of including them so that everyone has access to them. And I know in the past that sometimes you get the policies, but you don't have the ARs with them. Are now all the ARs included with the policies? So everybody knows what's going on, right? Terrific. My other questions had to do with some of the policies per se, and I think I'm going to work backwards, because the one you just talked about, I think our student representative Avery mentioned coaches in that line on 906, so it's parents, guardians, students, community members, volunteers, and I think coaches was something she mentioned specifically that was not put in that list. I think I'm right, Avery? Okay. And then I also wanted to mention my appreciation for you looking at the topic of civility and including it as a separate policy. I know that's something that the League of Women Voters has long been concerned about, and notes that it comes and goes in different places at different times, so it's always great to have a goal. Also, I would like to mention, just because I've worked a lot with young children, is that not all students in Radnor go to nursery school, and I hope people are going to be able to be informed in other ways besides going through nursery schools, and probably those are the parents who need to know most. And secondly, it's also been my experience that young children particularly enjoy the opportunity to have growth spurts. And I think sometimes when you assess abilities in the spring, you won't see the same child come in September that you saw in April. So I think, we all know that there's a big difference between a 3-month-old and a 6-month-old. And just because kids look a little bigger between 5 and 6, that's a real time of cognitive growth and stretching. So I think we really need to be thinking a lot about that. So please think about that. I know there are always adjustments that are made in the fall, but I think if you do it right the first time, it's probably better. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Winters. And with that, we will adjourn for this evening. Thanks, everybody.